Welcome back to the table, friends. I'm your humble host, GreyDMs. With me, as always, is Owen.
Hi there.
So, Owen, what topic do you gather us together to teach us this time?
My lore dump for today is, so have you ever had an experience where like you had a game or like a comic book or something and you're really into it? It's a really important part of your childhood growing up, whatever. And then they changed it and they made it different. And like it's still the same name. Like you think about comic books, like you have the Uncanny X-Men, and then you had the whatever other X-Men versions that came after that, or all the different versions of the Incredible Hulk or things like that. And it's just like, no, I liked the version I had. I don't like these new versions. Did you ever become irrationally angry about that?
Hashtag not my Space Wolves. Have I? Yeah, but I think I'm more irrationally angry than the average person.
Are you though? I beg to differ.
Oh, okay. Well, my future therapist will put that on record.
We'll go through this and we'll talk about it. But yeah, today I'm going to be talking about edition wars, and I'm going to be talking about two games that we are both quite familiar with and we've talked about quite a bit, one of them being D&D and the other one being Vampire.
So what you're going to do is you're going to tread on opinions.
I am going to tread on opinions, and I'm not going to say whose is better.
I will, but it's
okay. I mean, that's fine.
That's kidding.
After the Star Wars episode, you're allowed to do that.
Wah, wah, wah.
But yeah, we're going to go into a bit of this, and we're going to talk about people's feelings and opinions.
All right.
So, year 2000 is marked with a rebirth for Dungeons and Dragons. Wizards of the Coast, which had recently saved TSR from bankruptcy, released D&D 3rd Edition, a modern overhaul of the aging advanced D&D rules. This is a big deal. 3rd Edition introduced a unified D20 system, no more THACO charts or clunky subsystems, and a wealth of customization through feats and skills. It also came with a revolutionary open games license, the OGL, which we've talked about in the past. And this encouraged third-party publishers to create D&D compatible content. Fans largely greeted 3rd Edition with enthusiasm. Many saw it as a much-needed modernization of D&D after the stagnant late 90s. Of course, a few old-school old guards grumbled. Some missed the quirks of older editions or found 3rd Edition's rules too video gamey, which is funny because that comes up later too. But for the most part, 3rd Edition united the D&D community under one banner at the dawn of the 21st century, except for the people that we talked about with OGL in a previous podcast as well. But that's another topic for a different podcast. So meanwhile, over in the world of darkness, White Wolf Publishing was wrapping up an era. Through the 1990s, Vampire the Masquerade had thrived on its rich gothic punk lore and ongoing metaplot. By the late 90s, the lore had grown extremely convoluted. Doomsday prophecies, ancient vampires waking up and so on. White Wolf's designers felt the weight of that baggage. As early as 1998, they released a revised edition of Vampire the Masquerade, updating rules and advancing storylines. But the real shock came in 2004, when White Wolf decided to literally end the world. In a bold move, they published a series of apocalyptic books like Time of Judgment that brought the Masquerade story to a cataclysmic close. Vampire the Masquerade, along with its sister games, Werewolf, Mage, and so on, was declared finished. This cleared the stage for a completely new vampire RPG with a new setting and rules. Vampire the Requiem launched later in 2004. And this is the version that Grey and myself played. We did not play Masquerade. We played Requiem.
This was the RPG that got us into TTRPGs.
Yes. And I have feelings about this.
Yes, me too.
But I don't dislike either of them.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the versions before, and maybe we'll end up rehashing a little bit of that, but you can find it if you go back. Like what's the difference between VTM and VTR?
Yep. So for Vampire fans, 2004 was nothing short of traumatic. Imagine your favorite game's entire universe, the characters, clans, lore you've followed for years, abruptly, officially ends. White Wolf's reasoning made business sense. Masquerade sales had dipped and the meta plot was a tangled mess. But emotionally, it felt like a death. Many players had deep personal investment in the Masquerade's world, often through long-running campaigns or live-action roleplay communities. Ending that world was like pulling the rug out from under them. Some loyalists refused to move on. They continued playing VTM with their old books, essentially preserving their World of Darkness. Others, including newcomers, were willing to give Vampire the Requiem a shot. Requiem was not a direct sequel, but a full reboot. It shared the core premise of modern vampires hiding among us, but it scrapped the decades of Masquerade lore and famous characters. Thematically, it aimed for a more personal, customizable horror experience, no global meta plot driving things in the background. Mechanically, it used an updated storytelling system, streamlined rules, fewer clan factions, five core clans instead of 13. Designers hoped this fresh start would be more accessible and let players tell their own stories without the baggage. But oh boy, to the Masquerade faithful, Requiem seemed like a pale imitation at first. One fan summed up the knee-jerk reaction as, "There's no plot in this. I'm uninterested." A complaint that misses the point. Requiem wanted you to create the plot, but it shows how hard it was for some to let go of rich story web Masquerade had built. In essence, the stage was set for the Vampire Requiem fandom's edition war, Masquerade versus Requiem, old world versus new world. Over in D&D land, 2003 to 2004 brought its own smaller tremors. Wizards of the Coast published D&D 3.5 in 2003, a half-edition revision of 3E that tweaked and rebalanced numerous rules. Many fans welcomed the polish. 3rd edition had some cracks, after all. But some were annoyed at having to buy new core books barely 3 years after 3rd edition's debut. And that's something to talk about too, because before 3rd edition, it wasn't a long time because you had original D&D, you had advanced D&D and stuff like that. But some of those were like 5 or 6 years and then about 10 years and then you hit.
Yeah. I mean, so even though it wasn't a long time in between some of them, you still had people that bought a book and that book was on their shelf as the tome of reference.
Right.
For a decade or more about a particular subject.
Mm-hmm.
And that, like, I mean, in our, end game capitalist society, that basically is evolved, like, disintegrating.
Yep.
Jeez.
I mean, now that's par for the course.
40K. The whole concept that, like, every 3 years, we are going to take away your codex, give you a generic rule set that is not good, and then you're going to wait until your codex gets released.
And if you are the last codex...
And it may be a month or two before it's worthless.
Yeah. Grey has feelings about things.
But like 5th edition too. Like 5th edition D&D has kind of had that thing where it has a beginning. It got to the bloat point, which is arguably why they're like trying to clean things up. And they transition to a new point, but there's a discussion over whether you should move on, like what sits on, like, why is the new version in any way, shape, or form more authoritative than the version that you choose?
And we'll talk about that a little bit, because if you really think about it, think about the transition from 3.5 to 4th, and we'll talk about that, but the anger and the dissolution that happened there, and then look at 5 to 5.5, if you want to call it. And really, 2024. It's not there as much. I mean, there are people that are angry, but we'll talk about that. So Slashdot reported at the time there was anger from players and retailers who felt 3.5 came too soon given their investment in 3E books. Still, 3.5 proved popular and became the definitive version of D&D for that era. By 2004, Wizards of the Coast was churning out piles of supplements. Screen Rant noted that between 2000 and 2007, Wizards printed 12 different D&D core rule books and 50 plus expansion books. D&D was riding high financially, but the glut of material and rapid edition turnover did sow a bit of cynicism. Savvy fans could sense another big change might be on the horizon, and indeed, behind the scenes in mid-2000s, Wizards of the Coast was cooking up something bold that would soon split their community wide open. By 2007, rumors were flying that Wizards of the Coast had a 4th edition of D&D in the works. On August 15th, 2007, it became official. Wizards of the Coast announced D&D 4E was coming in 2008. The reaction was immediate and intense. This wasn't going to be just an update. It sounded like a major overhaul of the game's philosophy. To some longtime D&D players, this felt like an unwelcomed earthquake. They looked at their shelves full of 3.5 books, still new in their eyes, and wondered if all that would become obsolete overnight. It did. A wave of anger and panic rippled through forums and game stores. Even retailers were upset since 3.5 products would lose value. Thousands of D&D fans hit the internet to vent, and interestingly, many flocked straight to the forums of Paizo Publishing. Why Paizo? Because Paizo had been publishing Dragon and Dungeon magazines under license, producing quality adventure content for D&D, which we talked about in the Paizo podcast. In early 2007, Wizards of the Coast had ended that license, leaving Paizo in the lurch. In response, Paizo had started developing its own product, a series of adventure modules that evolved into a makeshift RPG line called Pathfinder. Initially, it was just 3.5 compatible. Paizo's team took a hard look at the surging community of 3.5 loyalists. Sensing an opportunity, and after some internal debate, Paizo made a momentous decision. They would not convert to D&D 4E. Instead, they'd use the OGL to turn Pathfinder into a full-fledged standalone RPG that continued the 3.5 rules lineage. In essence, they offered D&D fans an alternate path. D&D 3.5 would live on, just under a different name. This was unprecedented. By mid-2008, you effectively had two fantasy RPGs competing for D&D fans' loyalty: Wizards of the Coast shiny new 4th edition and Paizo's scrappy Pathfinder RPG. Now let's talk about why 4th edition was so polarizing. When it released in June 2008, it represented a paradigm shift in D&D's design. The developers of 4E weren't trying to make an improved 3rd edition. They threw a lot of D&D's sacred cows right out the window. Their goal, as one analyst put it, was to make the best tactical combat RPG, even if that meant moving beyond traditional D&D's fee. Practically, 4th edition introduced things that felt very video game inspired. Characters of every class had formalized roles, striker, defender, and so on, and a set of powers and abilities that recharged each fight or each day, not unlike abilities in MMORPGs. Combat was balanced and dynamic. Even wizards and fighters were given roughly equal numbers of cool maneuvers. It was a much more structured, combat-focused game than any previous edition. This came with upsides. For instance, it was easier for dungeon masters to run encounters, and monster stat blocks were clean and consistent. 4E's streamlined encounter design and monster formatting are praised even by later designers, but to many D&D veterans, the changes were shocking. Gone were some beloved subsystems and flavorful but unbalanced bits. In their place was something that didn't quite feel like D&D at first glance. Almost immediately, the edition war flames erupted online. As one retrospective describes, old school fans were universally disappointed by the wholesale changes. Critics, especially on forums like ENWorld and RPG.net, derided 4E as too much like a video game, pointing to the MMO-like powers. The reliance on miniatures and grid combat and the apparent de-emphasis of non-combat roleplay. The game's focus on balance and tactical combat led some to joke it would drop Dungeons and Dragons and just be called World of Warcraft. The pen and paper RPG for players who had spent years mastering 3E's crunchy simulationist style, 4E's approach felt almost like a betrayal. "All my hard-earned system mastery, gone," was a comment of lament. Meanwhile, fans who did enjoy 4E, and there were plenty, couldn't fathom going back to what they saw as clunkier old rules. Battle lines were drawn. Wizards' own actions during this time inadvertently poured fuel on the fire. They released a teaser pamphlet Wizards Presents Races and Classes 2007, and some marketing materials that hyped how 4th edition was cooler and more hip than old D&D.
That'll work.
Yeah, one infamous marketing video even caricatured older edition players as basement-dwelling grognards, implying 4E was for a new generation. That really rubbed some longtime fans the wrong way. The result? A lot of D&D's emotional old guard dug in their heels. They would not switch to 4E. They had their alternative in Pathfinder, which by 2008 was in a public beta. Indeed, this was the first time D&D had a well-supported rival product that was explicitly courting disaffected fans. The edition wars had officially begun in earnest. It was all over the blog forums and convention halls. 4E versus 3.5 Pathfinder, out with the old versus the true D&D. So let's look at what was happening in the vampire community around this time. So 2007, 2008. By this time, Vampire the Requiem had been out for a few years under the new World of Darkness line. It got decent reviews and had its own growing fan base, but many Masquerade veterans remained unconvinced. The dynamic was a bit different from D&D's, but the parallels are there. Instead of one new edition replacing another, here we had two different game lines, the old Masquerade, now out of print but still played, and the new Requiem, essentially vying for the hearts of vampire gamers. White Wolf, for its part, put all its support behind Requiem in those years. The company had ended Masquerade, so they weren't producing new Masquerade materials aside from a few novels. But they did plan something that got old fans excited. A World of Darkness MMO, which we talked about previously and we won't get too into. Notably, when details of this online game emerged around 2010, it was revealed the MMO would use the Masquerade setting, the classic World of Darkness, not Requiem. At a fan convention, when it was announced the MMO would be based on Masquerade, attendees reportedly burst into applause, a telling sign of where a lot of fan passion still lay. Even one of Requiem's key designers, Justin and Chili, acknowledged the divide. Chili once quipped on a forum, "Just because I enjoy playing Requiem more doesn't mean I don't know how to write Masquerade. I know the differences," implying he was keenly aware that the two games required different approaches and that fans of each expected a distinct feel. So in 2008, as D&D Old Guards and 4E fans slugged it out online, Vampire's community had its own quieter edition war. Many veteran vampire players simply stayed on the sidelines of Requiem. They kept their Masquerade books and continued their long-running chronicles as if the official apocalypse never happened. Others embraced Requiem's fresh start, enjoying the freedom to craft their own lore without a metaplot. The debates in the vampire fandom were usually less belligerent than the D&D ones. RPG fandoms all have their character, and the World of Darkness crowd wasn't quite as combustible as the D&D crowd during this era. Still, there was underlying tension. One common refrain, Masquerade had been about an epic world-spanning struggle, Camarilla versus Sabbat, Gehenna looming, and so on, whereas Requiem was purposely smaller scale, focusing on personal horror and localized stories. Some Masquerade devotees missed that grand scale and dense lore. To them, Requiem felt like it had no soul, or no point since there was no looming apocalypse or ancient puppet masters to uncover. On the flip side, Requiem fans argued that Masquerade's lore had become a restrictive mess. The metaplot was a train wreck, looked back on fondly with rose-colored glasses, but a train wreck nonetheless. As one commenter put it, they liked that Requiem freed them to define their own mysteries. And mechanically, Requiem's rules were a bit smoother. For example, it introduced the idea of blood potency to scale vampire powers instead of old generation stat. And it avoided some Masquerade's notorious balance issues. But as with D&D, these logical arguments often took a backseat to emotional detachment. Imagine that. Fans had identified with either the Masquerade style or the new Requiem style, almost as a matter of personal taste and loyalty. By 2008, it was clear that World of Darkness fanbase had split into two camps that, while not openly at war, were drifting on separate trajectories. A White Wolf forum user in that period worried that introducing yet another edition down the line would be another split in the vampire player base. Prophetic words, as we'll see when we get to version 5.
Go figure.
Back to D&D. By the end of 2008, the fallout of 4E's launch was becoming apparent. Pathfinder's gambit paid off. Many groups that refused 4E switched to Pathfinder, essentially D&D 3.75 all but name, as their fantasy RPG choice. For the first time ever, D&D's dominance was legitimately challenged. The edition war became a market war, with Pathfinder eventually outselling D&D for a while. In fact, by 2011, Pathfinder had surpassed D&D 4E in sales and market share, an almost unthinkable development before all of this. How did that happen? Well, Wizard unintentionally helped Paizo by completely cutting off support for 3.5 when launching 4E. They even yanked the PDF sales of 3.5 books. So if you didn't like 4E, Wizards wasn't going to sell you anything. You had to go elsewhere, which often meant Pathfinder. Paizo also smartly ran a robust open beta for Pathfinder in 2008, making those disgruntled D&D fans feel included in the creation of their next game. By contrast, Wizard of the Coast 4th edition playtest had been closed and in-house, which some say led to 4E not fully anticipating the backlash.
Mm.
Within the 4E community itself, there was even fracturing. Wizards released the D&D Essentials line in 2010, a sort of simplified 4E reboot meant to welcome new players and perhaps entice 3.5 holdouts by reintroducing some classic tropes. But many 4E fans found this confusing. Did they need these new Essential books? Were these alternative class designs replacing the originals? The 4E fanbase ended up split between those using base 4E and those using Essentials, which didn't help the game's momentum. A cannibal halfling gaming analyst points out a fascinating trend. Edition wars are fiercest when changes are big enough to alienate some fans but still attract others. That's exactly what happened here. And 4E, if 4E had been a total flop for everyone, there'd be no war. Everyone would just agree it stinks. But 4E was good for a certain playstyle, and many players loved it, while many others hated it for diverging from their playstyle. This divisiveness, combined with Wizard of the Coast's business decisions, led to one of the most dramatic edition wars for RPG industry has ever seen. Through 2009 to 2010, the internet was ablaze with edition war rhetoric. Terms like three-tards and four-ons were thrown around in darker corners of forums, looking through all of this and doing research on this, I was just like, that can't be right. And then I found them, and it's what you'd expect. Yeah. It's literally like, you're wrong because you're stupid, foron, and just like literally that's as much effort as I put in. Three-tards. Three-tards. Yeah, I mean, it's exactly what you expect. Gamers who just wanted to play D&D sometimes lamented that the fan community felt fractured and hostile. Imagine. Anecdotally, some gaming groups even broke up over edition preferences. One analyst quips, if the group is split, well, that's how D&D destroys friendships. That's only half joking. More than a few dungeon masters saw players quit rather than play the wrong edition. Meanwhile, Pathfinder's community had its share of zealotry too, with some folks practically evangelizing it as the true heir of D&D and painting 4th edition as an aberration. As one blogger observed, fans took up Pathfinder as a vehicle of grievances against wizards.
Yeah, that is the most true statement.
Yep.
That's what you need to understand. If you want to really understand what was happening during that time, just that sentence.
Mm-hmm.
That basically the thing that was paying homage to the past became the vehicle for your grievances. Yep. Instead of just your pure love of something.
Yeah, that was their blunt weapon in this fight, and not necessarily saying that was correct, but yeah, there it was. There was definitely a bit of us versus them tribalism at play, which when you step back is amazing considering these are all just variations of playing elves and slaying goblins with funny dice. But it speaks to how personally invested gamers become in their preferred rules and styles. It's like sports teams or political parties. Identity forms around it. On the vampire side in 2010, the intensity was less, but discontent simmered in its own way. White Wolf had merged with CCP Games, the EVE Online gaming company, in 2006. largely to work on that World of Darkness MMO. As a result, tabletop development slowed. Vampire the Requiem got a few source books, but it wasn't lighting the world on fire commercially. Many World of Darkness veterans yearned for the old lore. Sensing this, some of the original White Wolf crew who had moved on got a bright idea. What if we made an anniversary edition of Masquerade? In 2011, to celebrate Vampire's 20th anniversary, they did exactly that. Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition, V20, was released. First, as a deluxe fan direct book, it compiled and updated the old Masquerade rules, essentially bringing the classic game back into print after 7 years in the grave. The response blew expectations out of the water. Thousands of fans worldwide jumped to buy V20, many via a pre-order Kickstarter-style campaign. It became clear that Masquerade community had never died, it was just waiting in torpor, ready to rise. From 2011 onward, the old World of Darkness and new World of Darkness existed concurrently. The publisher by then, a new company, Onyx Path, licensed by CCP White Wolf, actually started supporting both Masquerade, got more books, and Requiem got a second edition in 2013 and rebranded as part of the Chronicles of Darkness to avoid the confusion, since now both lines were active. It's as if White Wolf's universe split into parallel timelines, and fans could simply choose which flavor to play. This move, unlike any D&D owners did, dampened the edition wars. With both versions available, it became easier for players to just say, to each their own. Indeed, many vampire players stopped seeing it as a fight. You want gothic punk Gehenna angst? Play Masquerade. You want personal horror sandbox? Play Requiem. Why not even borrow from both? Some storytellers mixed and matched lore and rules to their taste. The temperature lowered compared to the mid-2000s. So D&D's edition war was an all-out schism in the hobby, actively driving creation of a competitor and splitting organized play, whereas Vampire's edition divided, but after some initial angst, settled into a pluralistic truce. Part of this is due to market scale. D&D was and is the 800-pound gorilla of RPGs. Mm-hmm. So its edition war was highly visible and commercially impactful. Vampire, while very popular in the 90s, was a more niche game by the late 2000s, and its fan base fragmented didn't dominate RPG headlines like D&D's did. Nevertheless, both franchises by around 2011 had learned some lessons. If you leave fans of a certain style behind, they might find a way to continue without you. Wizards learned that the hard way with 4th edition, losing market share to Legacy 3.5 Pathfinder, and White Wolf Onyx Path learned it by seeing the outpouring of love and money for Masquerade's return. And it's just funny to think, like, we grew up in the Requiem era, and so much of this happened after we stopped playing it for a while.
Yeah, like we were brought into the RPG hobby.
Yes.
In the Requiem. Like, if we had been introduced as teenagers, we would have been firmly probably against it.
Probably.
Because we would have been raised at like the tail end of like, you know.
And like I was first introduced to Vampire through the Vampire the Masquerade video game.
Yeah, we both were.
So I knew about it from that perspective, and then playing the tabletop game in Requiem was a bit of a difference, because I was like, where
are the Brujah?
Where are the Brujah?
Where was the Tremere, right?
What about the Malkavians?
Yeah. Okay. This isn't the way this works. But yeah, it was just a non-issue for us, because we were just like, oh, that's old stuff.
Yeah.
And like the phrasing was always New World of Darkness versus Old World of Darkness.
Right.
And I think when they changed it to Chronicles of Darkness versus World of Darkness, that was like an appeasement, saying like, it's not the New World of Darkness, it's just a different thing.
It's just something else.
Yeah.
Yep. Where we were pretty deeply entrenched in the D&D 4E transition, the D&D 5E transition.
Yeah, we came back, to D&D as 5th edition. That was our exposure to it from a video game perspective into a tabletop.
Right.
We didn't have access to any 3rd edition, 2nd edition stuff.
Yeah, we tried it once with the person that introduced us to Vampire,
I think
but
we
it
made the
didn't get
character,
off.
but yeah, we
Yeah, but it
didn't do
didn't get off
anything.
the ground. Yeah.
So, like, yeah, we cracked open the book for the first time really with 4th edition.
Mhm.
And we were like, oh.
Well, this is different.
Yeah, okay. And we could never get the ball going.
No one really seemed interested in it.
There was never and then it was ultimately the test for 5th edition that was like, oh, this feels like something different. And then we were like, oh, we could do this. And, then the momentum came pretty quickly. Yeah,
And now I feel we've played too much and we need to get back to Vampire.
We played. I was with you to that last point.
Yes, because I know the toll that it puts on you.
It does. Like okay, that's a whole different topic.
Yeah.
But like, no, I think that because I was listening. Like, do you have more to go, or is this?
Yeah, I do.
Okay,
but it's all right.
Well, so I think it comes down to kind of there's this concept of like this is probably a reference you should get it. You watch the show The Good Place?
Yeah. Yep.
So the last season of The Good Place, spoilers if you haven't listened to. Well, I'll try to reframe this. They're dealing with the concept of trying to solve an impossibly hard problem of like what happens when you're dealing with this thing of a transition. And some people are ready to transition.
Yeah.
And other people, they claim they'll never want to transition.
Yeah.
And like, how can you satisfy everyone? You can't. But what is the goodest, what is the best outcome that you can arrange? How can you have the system? And ultimately, addition changes have to happen.
Yeah.
And they have to happen because we're capitalists.
Well, there's that, but then there's also, like I said before, the bloat that is happening because people always want something new.
But the bloat is capitalism, right?
Yeah.
Because a company can't exist where they make a product and then just say, hey, we're going to support this product forever. If you ever want to engage with it, which you can, and we'll add a little bit here and there, and we'll kind of throw a supplement every once a year to like keep it alive. Like the free market will let that die.
Yeah.
And that company will not be able to support that product anymore. So you end up in these cycles of we got to throw more stuff out there. We got to get you hyped about it. We got to throw stuff out there. Oh, we got to revamp everything. Okay, now that we've gotten this whole ecosystem that's very hard to get money out of, we'll have to throw it all into the dirt, light it on fire, and move to the next ecosystem, right? And that's inherently anti, like, deep earned passion. Like,
yeah.
There's a group of people that are like, they'll emotionally bond to something and they don't want to leave it.
Yeah.
Hence, they're the people who don't want to pass on to the next place. And those people, if in any way, shape, or form you tell them that they're wrong for not moving on or that they have to go, you get this.
It's like the way I always thought of it was, so your parents, you have a child and you invest time, energy, money, your life into this child. And then one day you're like, well, I'd like to have a second child. And you're like, okay, well, you have to burn and decapitate the first child to have the second child. And that's the way I feel a lot of people see this, because I think it's not as big for you and I, but I think some people, like I said in here, part of this is their personality that they've created for themselves. And they see it as an investment of their life. And now someone's saying, well, that's not valid anymore.
And I think it's also tied to a unsolvable part of humanity.
Oh, yeah. One of many.
Because like you think about like the one that we're kind of ignoring, the best example of this is like World of Warcraft.
Yeah.
And like if you're sitting in an edition of World of Warcraft, an expansion where we claim we would love to be, it'll eventually sour.
Yeah.
And you don't want to admit that to yourself. Like you don't want to admit that, like, for example, 3.5 eventually sours. You don't want to admit that this thing that you're attached to eventually, like, you need some life brought into it. It is stagnation. So when that happens, especially if you're forced to it, then this is, like you said, this is where you're like, oh my God, they're killing the baby to fund the new baby. But it also, the other part of it is that it matters how you're implementing this.
Yes.
And like you said, Wizards of the Coast did a horrible freaking job.
Yes, they took something that, while different through each edition of D&D, it still had some of the same shine on it. And then when they went to 4th edition, they're like, get rid of all that.
Yeah. I think it comes down to basically two major points, which is one, the first point is you are allowed, like you have an inalienable human right to sit on a thing and never look forward.
Yeah.
That is your right, and no one can talk shit about you for doing that. You can read the same book over and over every day of your life and never move on. That's you, right?
Just don't get pissed when somebody has a different opinion about that.
Yeah. The second thing is, there is a reason why you have to let change happen, even if it's good or bad. Like, I think vampires are really good kind of hallmark. I know you're eventually going to touch on V5, but V5 took things from Requiem. In my opinion, they probably should have taken more, but they did take mechanics that are just better. Arguably, they're more vampire-like. They're less superhero-like and more like tied to hunger and tied to an inherent. They're what happens when
balance of the scales that you had to walk.
They're what happens when a person who has 30 years in the industry writes a game versus a person who has had 5 years.
Right.
No matter how brilliant that first person is, they don't have the wealth of experience of living and seeing all these game systems evolve and go, oh, shoot.
Unless you're playtesting for 30 years, you're going to make some mistakes.
Yeah. So ultimately, like, there's a reason why stuff should move on and you should eventually... so
unless you're listening to this podcast, continue to listen to us.
Never move on.
Never move on.
Always just in a loop.
Yes.
Keep, hit the thumbs up.
Get your friends,
just
open up all of the devices you can find, create different accounts, log in,
just
watch.
Just violate the terms of service on every platform on demand.
Yes.
Yeah, it just changes hard.
Yeah. All right. So we talked about some of the difficulties. Let's talk about some of the healing. All right. So by 2012, Wizards of the Coast had to face facts. D&D 4th edition was not the unifying success they'd hoped for. The edition war had left the D&D community fractured and fatigued. Pathfinder was topping sales charts in 2011, a humbling moment for the Wizard of the Coast flagship game. So Wizards did something gutsy. They essentially went on an apology tour. In January 2012, Wizards of the Coast announced that they were developing the next iteration of the game, codenamed D&D Next, which would become 5th edition. By this time, they explicitly stated their mission was to end the edition wars and bring fans back together. How? By involving the community deeply in design process and honoring the legacy of past editions. Hey, let's ask some opinions about things before we just get rid of them.
And it's so amazing how, like, Paizo can go out and be like, hey, we're going to make our own product, which is what you want, and we want to involve you in the process of making it. And you're like, yeah, you guys are awesome. We're going to give you money. And then, like, the abuser comes in and goes, hey,
I'm sorry, baby.
We're going to copy the same thing that company did. And everybody's like, Lordy,
bravo.
Run screaming back. It's the power of the OG. It's just, you can't.
So Mike Mearls, the lead developer, gave interviews acknowledging that 4E had alienated part of the fan base. No one at Wizards ever woke up one day and said, let's get rid of all of our fans and replace them. That was never the intent. He was implicitly admitting that it felt like that's what was happening. He promised to listen to what fans are saying and get back to the core of what makes D&D D&D, to what made people fall in love with it, whether it was the red box in 83 or 3rd edition in 2000, give that back to you. This was basically Wizards suing for peace, and many fans, even some who had been extremely bitter, responded positively. The D&D Next open playtest launched in mid-2012 and ultimately attracted 175,000 participants who provided feedback. That's a huge chunk of the community engaged directly in shaping the new edition. The process itself helped heal rifts. 3rd edition old guards, 4th edition loyalists, and even older Advanced Dungeons & Dragons fans were all invited to the same table, figuratively, to playtest and discuss what they wanted from D&D. It was like family therapy for a fan base. In 2014, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition was released. And it was a triumph, not just commercially, but in terms of unifying the player base. Wizards succeeded in crafting an edition that intentionally blended elements of past editions, the simplicity and folk feel of old-school D&D, the character customization and balance lessons of 3E and 4E, and focus on storytelling that appealed to newer audiences. Perhaps most importantly, 5E didn't invalidate the past. It felt immediately recognizable to fans of any prior editions. One gamer humorously described 5E as Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2.5.3.5, implying it took bits from everywhere. The edition wars largely subsided. Many who had defected to Pathfinder gave 5e a chance and were pleasantly surprised that it felt like D&D again. Even some diehard 4e fans, though disappointed their edition didn't continue, migrated to 5e and found things to enjoy. 5e brought back story and exploration elements that 4e minimized. It wasn't perfect harmony. A few cliques still preferred their systems. The OSR crowd stuck to the 1E clones. Some 4E loyalists keep that flame alive. Pathfinder, of course, continued independently. But the ferocity was gone. As one gamer quipped, surviving the edition wars became a badge of honor and a source of camaraderie rather than conflict. It's funny because you could have survived if you just kept your mouth shut and didn't look, too.
Yeah, but that's not the... You don't get scars that way. Chicks
Right.
dig scars.
And indeed, with time, many who had bashed 4E even came to reevaluate it more charitably, once the pressure of the war was off. It's funny how that works. Once 5E provided common ground, fans could relax and even reminisce about the pros and cons of each edition without shouting. 4E gained a bit of cult classic status in hindsight, with dedicated communities that still praise its unique strengths. The D&D community was finally largely at peace, and better yet, it grew. 5e's success brought in legions of new players, helped by live play shows like Critical Role and an explosion of D&D streaming, to where D&D became more mainstream than it had ever been. By 2018, D&D 5e was breaking sales records and firmly reclaiming the #1 spot, with Pathfinder relegated to a smaller slice of the pie. Now, in the same early 2010 period, the Vampire World of Darkness franchise was undergoing its own renewal, albeit a bit more slowly and strangely. After Paradox Interactive acquired White Wolf in 2015, they made it clear they wanted to revitalize the old World of Darkness, not just keep it a nostalgia land. Paradox saw value in the Masquerade brand, especially due to the enduring popularity of the Bloodlines video game. So while Onyx Path kept publishing Chronicles of Darkness, Requiem 2nd Edition, and other new World of Darkness games, Paradox assembled a new White Wolf team to create Vampire the Masquerade 5th Edition, usually just called V5. This was essentially Masquerade's official comeback as an ongoing game line nearly 14 years after its death. Fans were cautiously excited. V5 was released in 2018, and like D&D 5e, it aimed to bridge old and new. The designers brought back the classic clan sects, Camarilla versus Anarchs, and so on, and much of the beloved lore, but they advanced the timeline and added modern twists. They also introduced bold mechanical changes, most famously the hunger mechanic. In V5, tracking a vampire's blood is handled through a hunger scale that adds special hunger dice to your rolls, a brilliant way to make the risk of the beast ever present in gameplay. This and other rule updates, streamlined disciplines, no more clunky Path of Enlightenments for Sabbat, made V5 feel fresh and more narrative-focused. At first, many vampire veterans welcomed V5. After all, it was Masquerade back in print, something they dreamed of. It outsold expectations, and global events like the Grand Masquerade Convention had fans lining up to get V5 books signed. However, the White Wolf team handling V5 stumbled into some serious controversies that put a dark cloud over the edition's launch. The biggest incident was the infamous Chechnya chapter in the V5 sourcebook. In late 2018, White Wolf published the Camarilla supplement and included a section that attempted to weave real-world atrocities, specifically the anti-gay purges in Chechnya, into the vampire setting. The text essentially posited that the Chechen government's persecution of LGBTQ plus people was a cover for vampire activity, even naming real-world figures as vampires. Put it mildly, this was seen as extremely distasteful and insensitive. Using ongoing human rights abuses as plot fodder crossed a line for many. The backlash was immediate and fierce. Fans, writers, and even outside observers condemned White Wolf for this decision. Paradox, the parent company, was apparently caught off guard. They had given White Wolf a lot of creative freedom up to then. The response was swift. Paradox pulled the book from sale, issued apologies, and within weeks dissolved White Wolf as an autonomous unit, firing or reassigning the leadership responsible. In early 2019, Paradox announced that White Wolf would cease developing products internally. Going forward, they'd license out the IP and only exist as a brand owner. Essentially, White Wolf was put on a tight leash after that. V5's line continued, but now overseen by new developers. Initially, Modifius Entertainment helped publish V5 books, and later, Paradox licensed Renegade Game Studios produce further supplements. This controversy, while not an edition war in the fanbase sense, did cause a rift and a lot of soul-searching in the community. Some fans were horrified that their favorite game had been used to trivialize real-world suffering, while others, a smaller contingent, defended it as edgy storytelling gone wrong but not worth canceling the game over. Paradox's decisive action in ousting the offenders was generally praised. It showed that the new stewards of Masquerade would put real-world sensitivity above shock value. This wasn't White Wolf's first brush with controversy. They had long been known for publishing edgy content, sometimes too far. But in the social media age, this one had far-reaching impact, even making mainstream press. In any case, after 2019, the focus thankfully returned to the game itself. V5 got back on track with new sourcebooks under careful review this time, and has been enjoyed by many groups as a successful modern revival of Masquerade. It has plenty of fans, but also some detractors. A segment of the old guard wasn't thrilled with certain changes. For example, in V5, the venerable Bruja clan defected to the Anarchs. The Assamites got folded into Camarilla under a new name, the Banu Hakim, and the entire Sabbat was basically turned into NPC antagonists rather than playable factions. These were significant lore shakeups that not everyone agreed with. Some also felt V5's writing initially tried too hard to be edgy and modern. The core book had moments of cynical, edgelord tone that rubbed some readers wrong, although others found it fitting vampire style. Mechanically, a few old guards didn't like losing some depth. V5 is somewhat rules light compared to previous editions, which can be great for story but means less mechanical crunch to tinker with. As an example, there's no longer a big list of skills and disciplines that go to 10 dots. In V5, most traits cap at 5, and powers are more constrained. For every player who loves the elegance of hunger dice and simplified disciplines, there's another who misses calculating blood pool points and huge dice pools for their Elder's celerity. I do miss rolling like 15 to 20 dice.
Like, yes, I'm going to just...
It's just like, it does not matter. This happened. This is happening. This is happening.
I have broken statistics.
Just what's more damaging, a vampire with a sword or a vampire with a sniper rifle? You would think the vampire with the sword, but because of mechanics, no.
The projectile only could get so strong.
All that said, the vampire community by the late 2010s had a broader perspective from its long journey. Many tables happily cherry-picked their preferred edition or even hybridized them. In fact, while White Wolf Onyx Path anticipated this by publishing conversion guides to help translate characters between Masquerade and Requiem at one point. The fanbase had splintered into at least 3 groups: the Requiem loyalists who kept playing Chronicles of Darkness and largely ignored Masquerade's return, the Masquerade Classic crowd, some of whom stick to the V20 edition or earlier rules because they prefer those nuance of the pre-V5 lore, and the V5 adopters who forge ahead with a new official canon. There's overlap among these two, but notably with V5 out, Vampires Edition wars flared out briefly around debates of V5 versus V20. Then it cooled. Why? Possibly fatigue. Fans were just happy the game survived it all. Also, with Masquerade and Requiem both supported, Onyx Pass still produces Requiem books under the renamed Chronicles of Darkness line. Players could truly choose the flavor they liked without it being a zero sum. It's reminiscent of how D&D's 5e era also brought more plurality. Plenty of people still play older D&D editions or Pathfinder, but without feeling the need to argue about it since 5e isn't threatening their existence. As we get closer to the current day, both our franchises have largely stabilized, but the echoes of past edition wars will shape their trajectories. Wizards of the Coast, fresh off the huge success of 5e, announced that D&D's 50th anniversary in 2024, they would release updated core books, essentially 5.5 edition, though they avoided calling it that. The codename was 1D&D, and signaling an intention that this isn't a brand new edition, but an evolution of 5e that remains fully backwards compatible. The very branding 1D&D speaks volumes. Wizards of the Coast is consciously trying to not fracture its fan base again. They want to keep everyone on the same page, literally and figuratively. As an analyst observed, Wizards has used the term backwards compatible exactly when they can least afford negative fan reactions. Turns out they know this from experience. The experience, of course, being the 4E fiasco where the lack of backwards compatibility drove fans away. By emphasizing that 2024's revised D&D still work with your old 5E stuff, Wizards of the Coast hopes to avoid any spark of an edition war. And notably, they're again doing an extensive public playtest for these, gathering feedback and making changes in response. They really don't want a repeat of 2008. So far, fans seem on board, though there's always some chatter. Every little playtest change gets dissected online, with some people inevitably grousing, "Don't ruin my game." But it's relatively tame. Most accept that changes will be incremental and optional. It helps that 5e is now so widespread and beloved that Wizards of the Coast must tread carefully, and they are. And I have to say, our few times into the current foray, which for me is mainly watching a different group play and sometimes joining in, I like a lot of the changes.
Yeah, a lot of the classes basically got kind of fixed in good ways.
Yeah.
Some of them got not fixed.
Yeah.
In horrible ways.
Yeah.
If you want to be a Nova Paladin, play 5th edition.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't pick up that new book. But also, if you want to play a Nova Paladin, you should stop. I understand you. I sympathize with you, but you should stop.
But you're wrong.
Your DM will thank you.
Yes.
To stop.
On the vampire side, in recent years, things have been comparatively calm. V5 continues under Renegade stewardship, with new books coming out that seem to be well received. For instance, source books on cults, the Sabbat, and so on, giving fans more of the lore they wanted. Requiem fans remain a smaller niche, but the game is respected as an excellent take on the vampire genre, even by some who prefer Masquerade. A fun twist, some mechanics from Requiem actually found their way into Masquerade's V5. For example, the concept of blood potency and more fluid approach to character morality are reminiscent of Requiem's ideas. So in a way, the two previously warring vampire editions cross-pollinated. And that is where we will end this particular podcast.
Want to know my hot take?
What is your hot take?
Now that we've played with both Generation and Blood Potency, I firmly believe Blood Potency is the superior mechanic.
I think it makes more sense.
It's just this whole like weird innate, I will forever be stronger than you unless you eat my buddy.
Yeah, yeah.
And like, oh, I ate your buddy, and now I have the same potential as you. And you're like, really? Like, Blood Potency dealt with that issue plus the Elder issue in an elegant way. And it was just like, no, this dude's awake. He's older than you. Higher blood potency. Here's the scale of power.
Yep.
The addition thing, the generation thing was like I get it. You don't need a number attached to the fact that you're older and you're closer to Cain or whatever, you know, like.
And it's like that was one of the things that always cracked me up is, you know, you always equate age with power a lot in Vampire. But at the same time, you have the situation where it's just like, well, what if someone got turned and then they turned someone and then they turned someone and they turned someone, like in really quick succession, 100 and 200, 300 years ago. And then that person went into torpor. They'd wake up, they'd still be weak. Like, it doesn't matter.
I'm thin.
Yeah. Basically.
Like, the thing is, like, there's two fundamental, like, needs. One is a need for you to basically play a game where you're walking around a setting that you love.
Yeah.
And you're like, I want to go to that setting and I want to poke around and do fucked up stuff and insert my characters. And the other one is like, I want to tell a robust, personalized story about a small group of people in an ecosystem that feels like it's our world.
And then they never fight.
Yeah. They never fight. But I think those are the two. That was the Requiem verse, Masquerade group was like those two kind of callings. And like the new edition V5 is enough to where you can kind of start throwing out Masquerade stuff if you lean towards Requiem.
Yeah.
And the game system still works pretty well. Or you can like go dive into that stuff and be like, hey, all right, let's talk about this person from this and the legacy. And while that stuff is really cool, you are putting such a burden on the storyteller to build you your world and adhere to all the crap you read online. And I think that's my inherent aversion to it.
Yeah.
Is like, just like, it's like the worst thing that happens in a D&D game, which does happen, is like someone sits at the table, someone that you're introducing to the game, and they're like, yeah, I know you made this custom setting, but I want my D&D to be this one from this supplement game from blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Like, no, like
that's not what we're doing here right now.
You didn't talk to us about the world. Like, we're all coming to the table to tell the same story.
I would like my character to be based on a completely different game.
Yeah,
like history, backstory doesn't exist in this world, but it doesn't matter because like that's what I want.
It's a ninja. I'm a ninja. Yeah. Yeah. So
yeah. There you go.
Argue with each other. You're nerds.
Yeah.
That's what you do.
Tell us why we were wrong.
Yeah.
Tell us why we were right.
Come at me, bro.
Argue with each other.
It's a super hot take that we could just throw out there to piss people off.
Yeah. Like, what is a super hot take?
I'm trying to figure out, like...
Paladins are inherently evil because they can't bend or twist to conform to society that they live in.
That's true. I was thinking more something like, I don't know. We'll just cut this part out.
Star Trek's better than Star Wars.
Once again, I think
like in all forms and deeds, story, lore, technology. I mean, the Enterprise would wreck the Empire. Like, sorry.
Yeah.
The Enterprise by itself would wreck the Empire.
Okay. Who's writing the story?
Me.
There you go. Because if the Enterprise went into the Star Wars world, it would pull up with all this technology that made perfect sense, a crew that's working in harmony, all the acumen to do everything, and some child would wander aboard and get the whole thing destroyed. That's how you write Star Wars. Like, some kid would just be like, oh, your name's not Picard, and I have the power to control everybody. Even though all those characters lived in a world where there was Q.
So I agree with you to a point, and then your name's not Picard, you're so-and-so, and then Data is like, this is weird. Oh, he seems to be emitting some type of strange radiation. Well, we're going to put him in a force field, and then we're going to eject him into space.
No, like he wouldn't, he's a precog. The kid's a precog.
He's a precog against something that has no magic, space Jesus, whatever.
That's why I said.
So
as soon as the Enterprise crossed into that writer's space, doom. Different rules of a narrative.
So could Data become a Jedi?
Data can't. Well, no, Data can't because that's a hard rule. There's no droids.
So would he be?
This is for the Patriots.
What's his? Yeah. What in the grand scheme of droids? Yeah. Where does Data fit in?
Like he's like the most. Like he's one of the most advanced droids in the universe. Like he's.
You think so?
But like the thing with droids is like almost all of them are Data.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make sense, right? Like the binary load lifter is having a whole freaking identity crisis while it's walking around lifting something up, and it's just going on this whole existential crisis of why it should exist.
Right.
Like it's such a like it just doesn't work in the same universe.
But Data has opposable thumbs.
Let's set a C-3PO.
Yeah, but in the entire series, how many times have you seen him make a fist?
Because he can't even hold the one.
No,
thing, right?
no.
Well, he can do that. Look,
oh no, this door has a doorknob. Dude, R2, however will we get through?
Dude, R2-D2 would hack Data. That's how horrible.
Again, that is who's writing it?
Exactly.
Star Trek or Star Wars?
That was my whole point. That's my whole point.
So that's why we need you guys to argue in the comments.
Get on this.
All
right. Edition wars being done.
I will bend to the rule of the comments unless you guys choose incorrectly.
As denoted by our adherence to Roddenberry's prime directive.
Oh, hell, Roddenberry.
It's going to leave it there.